Master Willem, I've come to bid you farewell.
Oh, I know. You think now to betray me.
No, but you will never listen. I tell you, I will not forget our adage.
We are born of the blood, made men by the blood, undone by the blood. Our eyes are yet to open.
Fear the old blood.
Hello everyone, this is Aegon of Astora, and welcome back to Bloodborne Let's Talk Lore. This is episode number 26, being recorded on Wednesday the 30th of March. I hope you're all having a fantastic day today, whenever it is you find yourself watching this. And so as you can see, our Aegon build, Aegon has gone through a wee bit of a transformation. And so what you will have just seen in the introduction is my best attempt at illustrating what I had hoped, or my vision for what a beast mechanic of that sort might have looked like in this game. Whereby, say, you could perhaps have a, and this would create mechanical issues in terms of the triangle button being used exclusively for heal, but perhaps you could have two different types of blood vials, and one of them containing the old blood or something to that effect, that the more and more you use it, the more susceptible to transforming into a beast, more susceptible to the scourge you become. I want to say, unfortunately, they didn't put anything like that in the game, but there is a very real argument to be made for it not belonging, and that's something that we're going to discuss in the what I believe will be the final episode of this series, when we talk a little bit about the Blood Minister and the origins of the player character. But the notion that as the Paleblood Hunter, we have a certain immunity to the Scourge of the Beast, that we can imbibe the blood however much we want, but there seems to be something special about the Paleblood Hunter in a way that isn't really that is unique to Bloodborne, that hasn't really been incorporated into the Dark Souls games. At least you could perhaps make an argument in Demon Souls for the player character being special, but that we somehow are immune to the same sort of beast transformations that we find throughout Yharnam with the NPCs. So it's very interesting. But yeah, I do think that it would have been rather cool to have some sort of mechanic where, you have an item of some sort, and if you rely on it too heavily, if you imbibe too much, then, either it could be a beast form like this, where you still sort of have some sort of consciousness, and you're able to actually control your own actions, and on the other hand, there could be like a beast form that is a little bit further gone, or a blood-drunk hunter state or something like that. Like I think that there's a lot that they could have done there, but especially in light of the conversations that JSF and I had in the previous episode, that I doubt that game development-wise, that something like that would have been possible, given the timelines and whatnot that they were working under. And the gameplay that you're going to be seeing throughout this episode is a fair bit different, and these enemies are a far cry from those that we'll be facing later on, of course. But I've never, for any prolonged period of time, used the Beast Claws. And something interesting to note that first time I noticed this, embarrassingly, was in Redgrave's video about Dark Beasts from the Little Things in Yharnam, is that, there's actually, like, that, the right hand is, a weapon that you can see the player character holding, You can see the knuckles there, that it's kind of grasping that one sort of handle. But the left hand, that's a beast's hand. Like, that's our hand transformed into a beast form. That's not a weapon that we're holding. That is the inner beast being channeled from within us. So it's very, very interesting. And we are, of course, wearing Brador's set, in addition to having 2 of the 3 beast runes on to accentuate our transformation effects. Which basically, when you have the Beast Embrace rune on, which I guess I should read the description. Just to recap, after repeated experiments in controlling the Scourge of Beasts, the Gentle Embrace rune was discovered. When its implementation failed, the Embrace became a forbidden rune, but this knowledge became a foundation of the Healing Church. Those who swear this oath take on a ghastly form and enjoy accentuated transformation effects, especially while wielding a beast weapon. And so, with all of that rambling about the beast form aside, we are in Central Yharnam for a particular reason, for 2 reasons actually. And I've been meaning to do this for several episodes in a row now, but each time I considered, coming here and wrapping up this loose end, I thought about what it was that we were going to do and, just decided to keep putting it off because I had really not much of an idea of how the heck to explain this really odd turn in the Gascoigne family storyline. But, if you've seen my Dark Souls 3 channel update video with my plans for Dark Souls 3, you'll know that we are kind of running out of time in this playthrough, so I am trying to wrap up as many loose threads as possible so that we don't leave too many of them hanging at the conclusion of this playthrough. So, with all that said, let's just do it.
You haven't by any chance seen my little sister, have you? I told her to look after the house, but she's run off somewhere. She's still quite small, and wears a big white ribbon. Have you seen her out there anywhere? Oh, how did this happen? Why would she ever go outside? At least I'll have something to remember her by. What a perfect ribbon. And now it's mine. I can't wait to try it on. Oh, it's wonderful.
So that's very odd, that when you're talking to her, she, outwardly expresses dismay at the death of her sister. But when you start walking away, she kind of says out loud to herself, just kind of expresses her excitement at having her ribbon, which she seems to have always wanted. And so you could look at that in any number of ways. It's screwed up in virtually any way you look at it, but I guess the least screwed up way of looking at it, or the least confusing for me, is that she has, so this is the sister of the daughter of Daughter Gascoigne, the older sister. So we're going to call her Sister Gascoigne, just to make it easy. That she's lost everyone. She's lost her father, her mother, her apparent grandfather, and Henrik, but that's something we'll talk about later on. And now she knows she's lost her sister. So in that context, that she's all alone, all by herself in a city full with full of beasts, and full of these men who aren't quite full beasts yet, but who have taken on, you know, a beastly form and really don't have any real sense of awareness of what it is that they're doing, of the actions that they're taking. They're just sort of wandering aimlessly about the city. That in that context, she has something like, you know, it triggers, I guess, a hysteria of some sort, where, you know, you kind of block out all of the loss that you've just experienced, and, you know, looking at the bright side, oh, sucks that I've lost everyone that I've ever known and loved, but hey, I got my sister's ribbon, and that's something I've always wanted. So maybe she's just trying to look at the silver lining? Yeah, I don't really know. So speaking of beast transformations, this is one of the more upsetting ones. Because when we warp here, we find that, yeah, there's a beast patient here. And previously, we find no beast patients anywhere in Central Yharnam. During my blind playthrough, when I first warped here, and came across this beast patient, I had assumed that as a result of the blood moon, the enemy spawns had changed. But then, upon closer inspection, we find that the window where we once spoke with Gilbert, that the bars are torn open, and we have this beast here. Sorry, Gilbert. Clawmark. The clawmark is an impulse to seek the warmth of blood, like a beast. It strengthens visceral attacks, one of the darker hunter techniques. Although the difference is subtle, Runesmith Carroll describes the beast as a horrific and unwelcome instinct deep within the hearts of men, while clawmark is an alluring invitation to accept this very nature. So unlike us, unlike the Paleblood Hunter, that Gilbert was, like us, an outsider who came to Yharnam, apparently seeking blood ministration, and like us, he would seem to have received blood ministration. Like us, he became a hunter, but you know, not a specific type of hunter, not a Paleblood Hunter like us. But unlike us, imbibing in the blood turned him into a beast. Excuse me. He's a rather weak beast too, so I don't know how he would have been able to completely tear through these security bars previously covering his window. But at least that very much seems to be the implication here. It must have been rather uncomfortable for him in there too after he started turning into a beast, because yeah, the incense lantern is still here and still going. So he would have been in there basically suffering, which perhaps explains how he was able to get the added strength to burst through the window like that. I'm not really sure. So unlike Gilbert's place, this place still has its incense burner going. Unlike Gilbert's place, there are no holes. The window, the security window, remains intact. The lights are out, and there's no response. And whereas with daughter Gascoigne, we didn't actually see her corpse, but the implication seems to be that she, I believe someone surmised in the comments very early on in the series, so I apologize because I completely forget who it was, that perhaps she was following the hunter's scent, which she mentioned almost immediately after meeting us that she recognized our scent. That perhaps she was following the hunter's scent after we told her to go to Uden Chapel, and ran into the man-eater boar in the sewer. And so we don't come across her corpse, but with Sister Gascoigne, we do. White messenger ribbon. White ribbon that messengers are oddly fond of. A ribbon made of fine lace that shines remarkably, more suited to pretty young girls than silly old messengers. So perhaps in whatever phase she found herself in the stages of grief, and I don't really believe that you can understand the complexities of human responses to grief by putting it in, an ordered list, a neat orderly list, like something like the stages of grief would otherwise suggest. But in whatever form her grief took, she initially was very happy at having gotten her hands on her sister's ribbon, which she seems to have always wanted, but could never get because it was her sister's. And then perhaps after that, she took her a little while until she realized, well, it's good that I have this ribbon, but it's just a ribbon, and I don't know where any of my family members are. And the blood spatter would seem to suggest that she fell while attempting to climb down the ladder. But I suppose it's equally possible that this huntsman's minion could have killed her, but it does look like she fell and died from the fall. And if we're to look at the path that daughter Gascoigne took when she was killed by that man-eater boar, Sister Gascoigne seems to have been going the same way, because it would seem that daughter Gascoigne went down this ladder, over there down the other ladder, and then all the way to the end of the sewer where we find the man-eater boar who dropped her ribbon. Sister Gascoigne didn't make it that far. It's possible that rather than simply falling, rather than this being an accident, that she actually purposely jumped and committed suicide. That's another possibility, but whatever the case, is a very odd, sad, and tragic story of the Gascoigne family that, indirectly or otherwise, the Paleblood Hunter is in some way responsible for the death of the entire family, the deaths of the entire family. But yeah, in a world like this, you could perhaps make the argument that they're better off. I don't really know. But it's really, really sad and tragic. So as the title of this episode suggests, we are now headed to the Nightmare of Mensis. We've warped to the lamp in Yahargul, where we defeated the One Reborn. And you may recall that in that episode, this is basically where we stopped. We didn't go up the stairs here. And we can see here either more depending once again on the answers to the myriad questions I raised in our Yahar'gul episode. Then we have here either statues of cramped casket-esque figures or collectives, or cramped casket-esque collectives that were petrified. But based on the bases, it does look like they are in fact statues, or at the very least that they were purposely placed there. We also find celestial statues to celestial children, which are a fair bit larger and more humanoid-like than the celestial children that we actually find throughout the game. And most of the statues of the celestial children that we find are much smaller than these ones. And then this room would seem to be ground zero for the Mensis ritual. And here too, we have some environmental design that raises more questions than it answers in terms of the chronology of what happened here. Because some of these bodies appear to have been here for a very long time. Note that this body here, which appears to be that of Micolash, I guess this one is a fair bit more withered than I remember it being as well. There's a little bit of skin left on the hands, but the face seems to be... Oh, I did that wrong. There doesn't seem to be much skin left on the head. Let's see if we can get a closer look. No, not really. But yeah, you really can't see the face of Micolash as we see it later on in this corpse here. But the rest of them, they seem to be wearing, so if your character is not wearing any pants, it looks almost identical to what these corpse models here are wearing. Or not wearing, I guess I should say. And some of these also have chains around their necks, which, much like some of the petrified corpses that we saw throughout Yahar'gul, could perhaps indicate that they were slaves. They're all wearing Mensis cages of various descriptions. Some are larger, some are smaller. Some of these bodies are of children, some are of adults. In fact, it looks like every single one of them is wearing, has chains. That one I can't really tell. So if we're to look at the Mensis cage as sort of being conceived of by the School of Mensis as a sort of antenna, that it needs to be placed on the head of someone. And if we look at these bindings that are on the wrists, the ankles, and the necks of these corpses, as evidence that these are slaves, or, you know, a subordinate class in whatever hierarchy exists in Yahar'gul, then yeah, it would seem as though these people were just used as in order to amplify the signal, I guess, of the Mensis ritual, improving the chances that the ritual will actually be successful. Because yeah, all, if not all, the vast majority of these corpses have those chains on. And you'll note that Micolash does not. Although, it does seem as though he has some sort of restraint around his ankles. But, oh. And around his wrists. So maybe it's not. Maybe it's not a mark of a subordinate class. I don't know. But in his case, it just looks like he's strapped himself to the chair. More than something that he would have worn everywhere. Whereas these corpses... Yeah, see, this child one doesn't seem to have any bindings. This one does. But yeah, the chain running down the chest. I don't know. I'm just running. I'm just going around in circles here. So let's talk a little bit before we enter the nightmare. Let's talk briefly about. Let's try to situate the nightmare, or resituate it, I guess, because we have situated it in the past. Beginning first with the Dreamlands, and I'm going to be reading a few excerpts in this episode from Redgrave's The Paleblood Hunt, which, in this episode, as with every episode, if you look in the video description and you've not yet read it, I would highly recommend doing so, that there is a link to be found below. So Redgrave reminds us that for Lovecraft, the act of dreaming was a method in which human beings could briefly transport their consciousness to an alternate dimension. The Dreamlands are not an illusion. They are a real place. The Dreamlands are a location just like Yharnam, Byrgenwerth, Cainhurst, or Yahargul. The mere fact that the player can take items from the Dreamlands and bring them back to the waking world is proof that it's a place that is equally real. And in terms of situating the School of Mensis, recall that once again, this is a diagram that we used in a much earlier episode, so prior to the DLC. So while some modifications might be in order, it does work for the purposes that I'm raising it here, and that is, recall that the School of Mensis isn't a splinter group, so to speak, of the Healing Church. That the Healing Church, founded by Lawrence, was split into the school, not necessarily split, but that there were various factions within the Healing Church. One of those factions was the Choir, and one was the School of Mensis. And I'm going to go on to just read parts of some additional parts from Redgrave's The Paleblood Hunt, but these excerpts are from the section in the chapter which I mentioned in a previous episode, but I figured I might as well actually show the disclaimer here that at the end of each chapter, Redgrave has a section where he writes, "What follows is purely my own interpretation and belief. Based on the evidence I have gathered, do not consider any of this as solid fact. Instead, use it as my interpretation so that you can gather your own beliefs." So Redgrave writes that the School of Mensis was founded to continue the study of the Great Ones that began at Byrgenwerth. Micolash reported to Lawrence and the Healing Church, and in return, they kept the existence of the school a secret. After the purge of Old Yharnam, however, secrecy was no longer necessary, and the Choir was formed to study the old blood of the Great Ones and Ebertos. Early on, Micolash and the Choir cooperated, as evidenced by the auger of Ebertos that Micolash wields. However, Micolash's experiments and the rituals of the School of Mensis slowly grew more twisted. Micolash began to kidnap hunters, likely to Ludwig's displeasure. Even the corpse of a Choir member is found chained and imprisoned inside of Yahargul, suggesting that Micolash and the Mensis students were growing emboldened by their closing nearer to the Eldritch truth. In response to this, the school would send a man named Edgar to infiltrate the School of Mensis and discover what was going on, implying that the school had begun hiding their research from the Choir. We know very little about Edgar. He is found in the Nightmare of Mensis and wears a student uniform, wielding a Ludwig's Holy Blade and Rosmarinus. Edgar traveled into the School of Mensis to find that the students now worship the Great Ones as literal gods, the Amygdalae in particular. Somehow Micolash came into possession of one of the umbilical cords of the Great Ones, Murgo's umbilical cord to be specific. Here was all the evidence they needed, the cord of a true Great One, Murgo, child of Yharnam and Odin. With the results of their research and the Cord of the Eye at their disposal, Micolash and the Mensis students would attempt to ascend to the status of godhood, just as Rom and Willem had done with the Orphan's Cord. Micolash would line his brain with eyes. When the School of Mensis communed with Murgo, the dead Great One, it was the end of Yahar'gul. The veil between worlds was ripped apart. Bell ringers brought the dead to life. The citizens fleeing the carnage were frozen in stone, permanently affixed to the wall so they so desperately tried to climb to freedom. The many caskets that lined the street burst open, body parts coagulating together into masses of meat and bone that clung together and attacked the kidnappers, murdering them. Mensis was dragged into the nightmare, ripped open. Micolash and all his students were dead, but their consciousnesses were pulled down into the nightmare. Very few would survive this transition, the only two we know of being Micolash and Edgar. Micolash was brought to the Dreamland, specifically the nightmare. Edgar likely survived due to the fact that he was not wearing a Mensis cage, and likely did not participate in the ritual, while Micolash is a bit of a special case. Micolash's corpse, still located in Yahar'gul, provided a gateway. So we find ourselves once again in the lecture hall. I was looking at my own map wrong. So the way that I've interpreted it, and you can see along the left-hand side that I've separated the waking world and the dreamlands. And that I've placed Yharnam at the top. So that includes Yahar'gul and all the places that we visit in the quote-unquote waking world. But also that, as I've mentioned in several different contexts, I separate the old underground labyrinth as the waking world chalice dungeons. And I've conceived of the chalice dungeons as being the reflection of the old underground labyrinth in the Dreamlands. So the lecture hall was a very tricky case in terms of trying to figure out where it fit within this map. And you'll see that where I landed on that was using the lecture hall as sort of the go-between, the halfway house. Even though it is in the Dreamlands, it serves as our, notwithstanding the Hunter's Nightmare, it serves as our passage point, our obligatory passage point, when we are passing from the waking world into either the Nightmare of Mensis or the Nightmare Frontier. I guess you have to grab the item to trigger that trap. So yeah, this is a very eerie place. We're not going to spend a ton of time here because we have, of course, previously discussed the lecture building, but there are quite a few things on the second floor that we obviously do not have access to when we find ourselves on the first floor of the lecture building. And even though I believe at the time we first visited this place, I was not especially fond of the idea that the lecture hall was pulled into the nightmare, I've since come around to that way of looking at it. So recall that the key to the lecture hall, or the lecture theater key, says that today the two-story lecture building is adrift in the nightmare, but once it was a place of reflection where scholars learned of history and archaeology. So that mention of it being adrift in the nightmare and the today at the beginning of that sentence leads me to believe that, or leads me to adopt, I guess, the common belief that the lecture hall was somehow pulled into the nightmare, that it's not a reflection of a waking world place, but it is actually a waking world place that was transplanted here, which is very interesting. So we don't find anything in this room, at least, that's all that different from that which we saw on the lower floor. But we do find one of these church servants here, and I believe that this is the only one who has this weapon set up. Or I guess it's not even a weapon setup. I had previously thought that he was holding some sort of something that was conducting that fire, but it looks like his wrists are literally on fire. So yeah, having the additional beast runes on really seemed to actually help boost the damage of these things. But if you're playing the game like I am, and that is killing an enemy and then stopping and talking for 10 minutes, it's very difficult to maintain that additional damage. But whatever.
Be. You cannot be. No, you didn't. Lord Amygdala? Oh, how did this come to pass? Now, wait just a moment. Do you think ill of me? Me? Indeed, I should think not. I shared with you a thing most secret. Now, you're witness to a miracle. And all the stronger for it. You should appreciate it, if you've a grain of gratitude in you. Yes. Appreciate it. No matter. Such details are trifling. We're fast friends by now. Let this express what words cannot. Oh, doubt me not, sweet compeer. What is friendship but a chance encounter? Ah, well met. My apologies, but I feel a profound thought occurring. On the good grace of a certain god, and the way he meted out his love. Well...
So I'm going to be saying this a lot during this episode, but this is especially true of Patches and his place in this game and the story. But I have no idea what to make of any of that. It is very interesting that, once again, in the aftermath of the DLC, we find these statues that we also found, or at least this looks very much, it certainly has the general shape of the statues that we found not only in the research hall, but also in the orphanage. And also a statue of messengers. An armillary sphere, which we find all throughout the game. And a chair that looks very much like the type of chair that Willem would have sat on. So this might have been Willem's office or quarters or something like that. I don't know. Complete and utter speculation, of course, but... But yeah, Patches, you know, on the one hand, he seems to have a place in the lore based on his appearances in the Chalice dungeons, but also the fact that he's not the only spider, half man in the game. That we are later on going to come across some of his compatriots. And he seems to, at least for a time, be very sincere in his worship of a god, presumably Amygdala, or as he calls it, Amygdala. But now he's, I guess, moving on, trying to find another god. Very interested in hearing, as always, what everyone else has to say about that in particular, but the second floor of the research hall in general. And I am missing something very important here. The nameless moon presence, beckoned by Lawrence and his associates. Paleblood. Three third chords. So in terms of gameplay, those two notes hint very strongly at what it is that you need to do in order to beckon the moon presence yourself, and thus get the childhood's beginning, or humanity's childhood, whatever the special ending is. The third, I guess, secret ending. But in terms of the lore, I've been thinking a lot about those excerpts that I prepared a few days ago for this episode from the Paleblood Hunt, and that no one, to the best of my knowledge, has really talked all that much about Edgar. And it seems to me, on the basis of, on several bases, but in part on the basis of the fact that he's wearing the student uniform, that, you know, he might not have been there for the ritual itself, as Redgrave speculated, but he might have, just like us, come across Micolash's corpse there, and found his way into the lecture hall. And I don't know why he would have stopped in a place like this and written these things down and left them here. But I can't really think of who else might have done it. That even though he appears in gameplay terms to be a very, not very good at espionage, which, you know, his name per the official guide is Edgar Choir Intelligencer, so that is, he's an intelligence agent who works for the choir. So if his job is to gather intel, and he seems to have preceded our journey through the lecture hall, because, you know, when we get to the Nightmare of Mensis, he's already there. He's already set up shop. Unless it's someone who, you know, more indirectly is there. And I'm also thinking of JSF's video, which we discussed in the previous episode, on Odin, where he came up with this really plausible proposal that note in the library between the tomb of Odin and Odin Chapel, that may have been left by imposter Yosefka, who was herself a member of the choir, or who all the evidence suggests at least was a member of the choir, or is a member of the choir, and who herself is doing some sort of undercover work. So if she left that note there, and if Edgar, who is explicitly said to be, an undercover agent of the choir, and who is wearing a student uniform, maybe he was walking around here and piecing together intel, and for whatever reason, maybe he didn't write this one, but I think it's probable, if not probable, then at least possible, that he left one or both of these notes here, because I really can't think of anyone else who might have left them. We find ourselves in the Nightmare of Mensis, and right away we're greeted by more statues and or petrified collectives that look, or at least are reminiscent of, the cramped caskets. There's a silver beast. And that is Murgo's Loft. In the previous episode, JSF pointed out that with the silver beast in the nightmare, under certain conditions, when you kill them, parasite worms will burst out of their body. JSF pointed out that if you look in their mouths, you can actually see the parasite worms sort of nestled in there. So we're going to see if we can sneak up on it and get a look at that. So we are playing offline, just based on what happened the last time we went to a nightmare area while recording this series. I asked everyone in the aftermath of that episode what you would like me to do when we finally went to another area where we are liable to be invaded, and the consensus was that we should just go offline, so we're offline. And we can see here, as JSF noted for us in episode 19, that there are these spears. That when the brain of Mensis initiates its frenzy attack on us, that these spears sort of burst out of our bodies. And these corpses wearing Healing Church attire, although we have no idea what specific faction they may or may not belong to. Yeah, would seem to have been killed by the gaze of the brain of Mensis. Which, given our relatively low amount of insight compared to the rest of the series and our beast transformation, I don't know if we're immune to the frenzy-inducing gaze of the brain of Mensis. But so far, so good. We're not taking any frenzy build up at all, but... Oh, I spoke too soon. And there are those spears. So we're going to equip some sedatives just in case, and also we are going to need... We are going to need some Shaman Bone Blades eventually. So yeah, that's pretty intense. So somewhere on the landscape here is the Nightmare Frontier. I don't know exactly where it is or if we can even see it from where we are, but you can see Murgo's Loft from the frontier. And recall also that in the Nightmare Frontier, you can see the ship mass poking up from below, which seems to be the same ship mass that we find in the fishing hamlet. So we are, in a sense, and so I'll pull up the map again that I made. We are, it would seem, on top of the fishing hamlet right now. That somewhere below us is the body of Kos. Yeah, for lore reasons, I tolerate this area, but gameplay-wise, this really is an enormous pain in the rear to get through. Though in the past few episodes I've done full clears of places that I've normally just run through, we are to some degree just going to run through this area. We have these lost children of antiquity, I believe they're called here. Who JSF talks a great deal about in his the first episode of his Bloodborne Up Close series. Still amazed to this day by the amount of information he was able to glean about them from environmental design alone. So yeah, like I said, I know in past episodes I've been doing full clears of areas, but those spiders are not especially fun to deal with, especially when you're using a weapon setup that you've not used really at all. So speaking of Edgar, here he is in the flesh. Again, wearing a student uniform that maybe he picked up while he was in the lecture hall. And that maybe while he was there, much like Yosefka, while she was in that study in between the Tomb of Udin and Udin Chapel, maybe he wrote those notes that we find, which reveals a certain knowledge about the world in its current state and what is happening, which is very much consistent with someone whose trade is intelligence, as the name Edgar Quire Intelligencer suggests. He's also notoriously difficult to take down, so I think we're going to go open up the shortcut first before we actually fight him. Hi, Edgar. And I don't know why I sent that back up, but we're going to replenish our blood vials as well. So whereas the other lamp in this area is referred to as, is just simply named Nightmare of Mensis, this lamp here is referred to specifically as Murgo's Loft Base. So, clarifying that it's not just the upper portion after Micolash that is Murgo's Loft, but the entire structure is Murgo's Loft. These guys are Murgo's attendants, according to the guide. And they're pretty cute. So I don't really know much about them beyond, yeah, what their name suggests, that they serve Murgo. The great one, the apparent child of Queen Yarnum and perhaps Udin, but it's not entirely clear. That was way easier than I was expecting it to be. I'm sorry, Edgar. Man, we also have these what appear to be eyeballs, but with spider legs. Well, they have 1, 2, 3, 4. They don't appear to have 6 legs. That are all sort of pinned to the floor with these sticks. And I always thought it was adorable the way they kind of look at you as they're walking by. They're like, yeah, I'm not sure if you're supposed to be here. And I think they tolerate you up to a certain point. But then after you walk past that point, I guess, because you are nearing closer to their master, that they all start attacking. Either that or the larger enemies, Murgo's chief attendants. Perhaps they're the ones who give the order to start actually attacking the player character. Yellow Backbone. So recall that we picked this up after killing the one reborn, and the item description reads, special material used in a Holy Chalice ritual. Special body parts collected by the Healing Church. What was this gruesome bait used to lure? The additional rite rotted offering beckons ungodly forces, normally terrifying things, but also worthy prey for a special hunt. The image for the item depicts exactly what you would expect it to depict based on the name, and that is just a yellow backbone. I love these guys. Hi, friends. What is he doing? Hey guys, I'm on your side, I promise. So JSF raised in the previous episode these mirrors. I believe these are different than the ones we... How did you get up there? Hi, friends. Hey! What did I do? I didn't do anything. I don't think they're happy with me. Guys, look at your friend. He got up on the railing. Aren't you proud of him? It's been really hard to get up there, friend. I guess I pushed my luck for a little bit too long there. This one here is, as I suggested, or as I pointed out earlier, one of Murgo's chief attendants. Very interesting that his hits build up poison. Hinting at the impurity of Murgo's attendants. And though they are wearing chainmail which obscures, their faces and everything, they do have that sort of, although it looks almost metallic, I don't know. They do look kind of like Tumerians. They have that same kind of really smooth but pale skin. Which is, of course, shared, as we pointed out in the previous episode, by the noble bloodline of Cainhurst, in addition to the Tumerians themselves, and that the Cainhurst bloodline may in fact stem back to, may in fact have its roots in the Tumerian society. So when I mentioned that there are certain things that I'm going to have no idea about, and then I'm just going to kind of throw up my hands and ask someone else to perhaps chime in with an explanation, this is one of them. The dog crows and the crow dogs. I don't know if it's evidence of some sort of odd experimentation that the School of Mensis was engaged in, but if that were the case, you'd think that we would find them in Yahar'gul as opposed to in the Nightmare itself. So I have no idea what to make of them. These are all questions, of course, that we're going to revisit when, if all goes well, I'm able to get JSF and Redgrave together to be my guests as we explore Murgo's Loft proper, that is the upper half, after Micolash. The reason why we're coming here now and saving Murgo's Loft until afterwards is so that we can get our hands on the living string, and I don't know if we're going to have time to fully explore Tumuru Ihil, but certainly we are going to talk about two of the boss fights in that Chalice Dungeon. That is the Headless Bloodletting Beast and Queen Yharnam herself. Whether or not we do that, whether or not that gets its own episode, is something that I've had to reconsider based on the amount of time I have between now and the release of Dark Souls 3, in addition to, my professional obligations and whatnot. But that's something that, if you're interested in hearing me blab on about that, you can check out the channel update I recently posted. So something that's very interesting about these enemies. Note that when we hit them, even though we can get regain, we're not getting any. So these marionettes are not biological beings. They are animated constructs. As evidenced by the fact that, yeah, they are, I think, one of the very few enemies in the game from whom we cannot actually rally and regain our health. So that's very interesting. And I love that attention to detail that they included with that.
Ah, cause. Or some say cosm. Do you hear our prayers? No, we shall not abandon the dream. No one can catch us. No one can stop us now.
Well, that was embarrassing.
Oh, majestic! A hunter is a hunter even in a dream. But alas, not too fast. The nightmare swirls and churns unending. As you once did for the vacuous Rome. As you once did for the vacuous Rome. Grant us eyes, grant us eyes. Or some say Cosmo. Do you hear our prayers, as you once did for the vacuous Rome? Grant us eyes, grant us eyes. Plant eyes on our brains to cleanse our beastly idiocy. A grand lake of mud, hidden now from sight. The cosmos, of course. Let us sit about and speak feverishly, chatting into the wee hours of new ideas of the higher plane. Oh!
So some interesting things to note from that boss fight. First was how lucky I am that, aside from the call beyond that he was trying to trigger when I landed that plunging attack on him, he didn't attempt a single call beyond after that. And also, I don't think I've ever seen him use his fists so much in the fight. So, for one reason or another, he seemed rather intent on beating us up with his fists. So, I will take it. We picked up the Mensis cage, which the item description for which reads, "The School of Mensis controls the unseen village." This hexagonal iron cage suggests their strange ways. The cage is a device that restrains the will of the self, allowing one to see the profane world for what it is. It also serves as an antenna that facilitates contact with the Great Ones of the dream. But to an observer, the iron cage appears to be precisely what delivered them to their harrowing nightmare. And when he warped through I think the second or the third mirror, he led us directly to the iron door key. The description of which reads, "Of the 3 great bridges that link the 2 cathedral cradles, this key opens the iron door that leads to the mid-level bridge. There are no thieves in the nightmare then. Why lock a door? Be warned. There must be a very, very good reason." So I don't know if anyone can explain to me the purpose of the iron door key. I suppose if you don't know otherwise how to get at the brain of Mensis, there would really be, if you don't know about the spot where you're supposed to take the elevator down and then jump into that window, it's very hard to figure out, how to get to that spot. In which case the iron door key would allow you to access that spot, but I don't believe it allows you to do so in such a way that allows you to drop the brain of Mensis into that dark abyss type area. Which begs the question of why even have it in the game to begin with. That I've never understood at all, so I'm very curious to hear if anyone else out there is confused about that, and if anyone else has any insight into why that might be. Note also that during the boss fight, when we hit him at that one point, prior to his going into that room, that the effect of him disappearing, as JSF pointed out in the previous episode, is very similar to that which we find when we hit Gehrman in the Hunter's Dream, but also similar to the effect that we find when we hit the carriage that was set to carry us to Canehurst. What that means, if anything, I cannot really say, but it's interesting nevertheless. He also mentioned a great lake of mud. As we see the shadows of Yharnam, that is what would seem to be the bodyguards of Yharnam, the Pthumerian Queen, patrolling the area. But we're not proceeding in that direction right now. But yeah, he mentions a grand lake of mud, and a possibility that JSF raised in episode 19 when we were in the fishing hamlet is that perhaps Micolash, who does speak of Kos, but acknowledges that some people refer to Kos as Cosm for some reason, speaks of a grand lake of mud, which, if the map that we looked at earlier is in any way, shape, or form accurate, would seem to be directly below where we are. I don't know if that means anything or if, it's even plausible, but it's a very interesting way of recasting his dialogue in the aftermath of the DLC. So if you've been in any of my live streams where we've gone to this area, you already know that this maneuver that you have to make to get into that window, that it's basically my Achilles heel in this game. That I'm notoriously terrible at timing the move from the elevator into this window here. And I am told that you can, in fact, make it on the way down, but that it's easier. It's my understanding that it's easier on the way up. I may be completely getting that backwards, and maybe that's why I always die there, but I don't know. Let's try that again, shall we? Pick up the 900,000 souls we had on our person in the process. We did it! So now this place here is no joke. Special material used in a Holy Chalice ritual. Special body parts collected by the Healing Church. What was this gruesome bait used to lure? So very similar to the yellow backbone. Oh, here we go. Hopefully we don't die here again. That was very close. Very, very close. That didn't work out nearly as well as I'd hoped it would. And I don't think it's going to, but that's okay. And here we have some of Patch's compatriots. Once again, really, really close there. Cutting it really close. Now this part here is obviously a callback to the Tower of Latria from Demon Souls. There was a very similar event whereby you would have, yeah, basically the exact same thing where you had this thing hanging. I don't recall exactly what it was. You pull a lever and it would just come crashing down. But we can see right here where my crossers are. That's the brain of Mensis. Just sort of hanging there. Really kind of helpless in a way. It almost makes you feel bad for doing this, but and we see it dropping into, yeah, what seems for all intents and purposes to be an abyss. I think for this part we're going to switch over to the saw spear, or saw cleaver. Just because there's an item that we're going to want to get over there, but there is also a... There's also a few spiders over there, as well as a... winter lantern. Perhaps this is a good time to rely on the Black Sky Eye, since we have so many Quicksilver bullets. That's not what I wanted to do. So again, from a lore perspective, the way in which the frenzy mechanic incorporates this Lovecraftian story element into the game is brilliant, absolutely brilliant, but from a gameplay perspective it can be quite frustrating sometimes. So you may have noticed when we respawned just there, I cut out a run back to the, or a warp back I should say, to the Hunter's Dream, where we equipped the 300 Frenzy Resist rune, in addition to spending all the insight that we had on our person. So I don't know what our Frenzy Resist was at previously, but we're at 456 right now, which is quite good. So let's see if we can get those, not that we need the echoes, but it was 1,000,000 echoes, so let's see if we can get them back. Yeah, you can see our frenzy bar is a fair bit longer now than it was previously. Okay, so let's try this again. Choir Bell. Special hunter tool of the choir, high-ranking members of the Healing Church. Fashioned after a bell that projects an arcane sound across planes of existence. The sound of this smaller, silver version of the bell does not cross planes, but grants vigor and healing to all cooperators. And once again, as with pretty much every one of the Hunter's tools, you can see a Cosmos type effect, that the quote-unquote magic that is being conjured is not really being conjured, it's just you're opening up a portal to the Cosmos, and the effect is coming through that portal. So this is the spot here, I believe, that the iron door key would lead us to. And it's littered once again with these corpses that have these frenzy spears having burst out of the bloodstreams of these individuals. Very, very odd. Although I guess not all that odd, considering if we had tried to come here prior to dropping the Brain of Mensis into that abyss type place, then this is essentially what would have happened to us. I always thought the moon here was beautiful. It's very, very striking. So yeah, that's the door. And so if you had tried to come here without taking the secret path through that window, then yeah, the item description definitely holds true that there are some places that you definitely don't want to go. And this, prior to dropping the Brain of Mensis into that abyss type place, is very much one of those places. We also find here a blood rock. And of course, if we try to fall in there, we will not survive. If we try to jump down there, I should say. So yeah, I really don't know what triggers the Murgo's attendants to become hostile to you. I can only assume it's once you... I think it's this point here. Once you walk past that mirror, they don't seem to take too kindly to that. Here we come face to face, or face to Brain of Mensis. I don't really know how else to describe it. Yeah. This is a great one. Several things worthy of note that many others have pointed out in other places. Parts of the Brain of Mensis seem to be comprised of messengers. So if you look, that yeah, it's just a bunch of bodies of a bunch of messengers stuck together. It's called the Brain of Mensis, but it doesn't really look like a brain at all. It has these tentacle type things there, and then it actually has two hands with 1, 2, 3, with 6 fingers, so much like the Celestials. So if you want to look at it as a brain, it is a brain literally lined with eyes. And yeah, it has these really long nails, or claws, really. And I really don't know what to make of this protrusion of tentacles on what appears to be its backside here. So it looks like what appear to be like tumors kind of just growing up the back here. And it does also seem to have hair. But unlike the tattered clothing that emanates from, or that we've discussed that was on the cramped caskets, this actually appears to be hair. Or foliage? I really don't know. So the camera getting stuck behind the brain of Mensis kind of ruined that there, but as you may have seen, or as I'm sure you've noticed if you've done this yourself before, we were doing make contact, and then when we changed directions, we were granted the moon rune. A secret symbol left by Carol, runesmith of Bergenworth, a transcription of moon as spoken by the great ones inhabiting the nightmare. Gain more blood echoes. The great ones that inhabit the nightmare are sympathetic in spirit and often answer when called upon. So we picked up this one. I believe this was in Yahargul, in the pre-blood moon phase. It's on a corpse there right by the lamp for the Hypogean jail. This one, I believe we picked up in the in Micolash's boss room. And yeah, we just got this one from the Brain of Mensis. So as we discussed in the episode where we first visited the Upper Cathedral Ward, the Make Contact episode, that gesture is, the idea behind that gesture is that we are showing ourselves to be intelligent to an extraterrestrial being, or in this case, a great one. And we made contact with it, and somehow that resulted in us receiving the moon rune. In the same way that we received blood echoes, if you recall, Blackhawk Rogue Ninja's post that we discussed a few episodes ago. The same way that we received blood echoes, runes seem to be transmitted in a similar vein. Just as blood echoes translates more or less to the dying wish of the blood, we've somehow, gained access to that rune by making contact with this thing here, which we unfortunately have to kill in order to learn more about, so... living string. Special material used in a Holy Chalice ritual. The immense brain that Mensis retrieved from the nightmare was indeed lined with eyes on the inside, but they were of an evil sort, and the brain itself was terribly rotten. But even still, it was a legitimate great one, and left a relic, a living relic at that, which is a precious thing indeed. Alright, moving on to the comments from the previous episode, of which there were 207 at the time I'm recording this. So, again, another record. I believe that's the first time we've broken the 200 comment mark. Full stop. So thank you to all of you who shared very kind and thoughtful remarks and engaged in really respectful discourse in the comment section, even where there were disagreements. So as usual, that means, unfortunately, that I'm not going to be able to get to everyone, and that there were many comments that I very easily could have talked about, but we just unfortunately don't have the time. So please, again, don't take that personally. So first we have a comment from EdSaurus01, who points out something that I guess it's such an obvious thing that JSF and I kind of overlooked, although I assume that JSF didn't overlook it, but that we didn't mention this possibility, and that is, I think, EdSaurus01 writes, I think the noble women are headless because of Logarius. He uses a scythe, even if the executioners use his wheel. So yeah, it's entirely possible that, and it's kind of a perverse way of using this word, but the honor of beheading the vile Canehurst nobles was reserved for Logarius, that maybe they were blindfolded and just kind of lined up, and Logarius just beheaded them one by one. Wolfie294 wrote in reply, I always believed Logarius to be a good man, who accepts that sometimes violence is necessary, but unlike the sadistic nature of the executioners, he is more like Garamond and does not enjoy it. He views it as a mercy. And first name last name wrote in reply, I had the same impression of him. After all, he did say that acts of goodness are not always wise, and acts of evil are not always foolish, but regardless, we shall always strive to be good. So that, in a way, sheds new light on not only the apparent sadism of Alfred, how he's kind of zealously, if, you know, we're going to look at this possibility and consider it as what happened, that he's following in the footsteps of someone who would not have used the wheel as a weapon to grind and, however it is that he put it, to just mercilessly and excessively slaughter them. Because why else would they have blindfolds on, if not for Logarius perhaps viewing it as his duty, as mercy, to behead these women while blindfolded, as opposed to using the wheel, which is more likely to result in a slow and painful death, as opposed to a scythe, which is just, if you used it similar to Garamond, just one motion and their head is gone. So very interesting. Thank you, all three of you, for raising this possibility. Excusable Gold writes, on the topic of Japanese nuances that might be missed by Westerners, has anyone noticed how the make contact gesture looks like the Japanese kanji character for up, that is, to ascend? And with the provided kanji character, yeah, that's pretty cool. And something that, once again, we would never have noticed were it not for all of you wonderful people sharing your knowledge of things that I know nothing about. So thank you. The next comment is from Centimeter Worm, who writes, I think the reason that they chose not to use the executioner corpse is because most players would so readily associate the corpse with Alfred that there might have been a great deal of confusion as to who the corpse belonged to. But then again, this is From Software, the kings of not saying it out loud, so I honestly have no idea. And this comment seems to have been truncated in a similar way to several other comments, so I don't know if I'm doing something wrong or something wrong with Firefox and Chrome. I checked in both, but the comment just ends with you'd think that. But JSF writes in reply, in any case, yeah, that might be the reason. I'm not sure if this is necessarily the case, but I wanted to grant the possibility, because you could have an Executioner Corpse model just the way they have the one, and then have a second one that has the golden Ardeo, which Alfred wears. And so, but I guess the problem is that Alfred was in a very particular pose when we came across his corpse at the place where we first met him. So I'm not really sure. Much0J writes, one thing about the arthropod living in fish mouths, he actually grows into the host where the tongue was growing out of and replaces the tongue. So it can't leave the fish anymore. It gets its food from the fish blood from its vessels later on. It doesn't rely on using its mouth to feed the arthropod. It doesn't do anything to the fish, and they can coexist okay. It's also the only known parasite that can fully replace the host's organ. Sorry for my English. Loving your lore stuff. Cheers from the Czech Republic. Well, thank you much, 0J or OJ. JSF writes in reply, that's actually really interesting because the silver beasts with the parasites in their mouths and throats can have the parasites pop out and lash around like it's their tongue. And I believe we did see that at one point in this episode, suggesting perhaps that the parasites have replaced the tongues of the silver beasts. So yeah, that is very interesting. Thank you, MuchOJ, for pointing that out. 12 is a letter writes, something interesting about Henrik that I don't see many people comment on. Henrik is actually black. Since you can summon him as a member of the League, you can get a good look at him, and he definitely has darker skin. Now that doesn't mean he can't be Viola's father, but Viola and her children, the one we do see at least, both have extremely fair skin. I think if Henrik is the granddad that daughter Gascoigne mentions, he isn't her literal granddad, but just an older man who was very close to her father, and thus her granddad in the same way that some parents might refer to their good friends as auntie or uncle when speaking to their children, even if they aren't related by blood or marriage. As I understand it, so like the phrase auntie or uncle, at least in Indian culture, is almost like a sign of respect for someone who's a family member or even just friends of the family who are older than you. So I think that that's very interesting. An additional possibility that 12 is a letter doesn't mention here is that perhaps Henrik adopted Viola, that Viola is Henrik's adoptive and not necessarily biological child. But we're getting really far into speculation territory here. But when you look at the image that 12 is a letter provided, yeah, yep, Henrik does appear to have much darker skin. So that's very interesting. Thank you very much for sharing that. And Gina, in one of the comment exchanges that were happening on the comment section of the previous episode, shared a link that I thought was hilarious, so I thought I would share it with all of you as well. Gina writes, if we're having fun with Henrik, here's some more beastly idiocy to tantalize and lure us. And so Gina linked to a post from someone on Tumblr named And Always Roses, and the post is titled Old Hunter Henrik Headcanons. And I'm gonna read a few of them because I think that they're pretty funny. Henrik was so badass that he didn't fight the Scourge. He just told it to piss off, and it did. When Gehrman was young, Henrik was already old. Henrik wears the face sock, so no blood gets in his magnificent stash. He also keeps the stash hidden because it is known to cause frenzy. Once he eyeballed a winter lantern, and it started to play his favorite song. The choir stays in the choir because Henrik told them to. Henrik is the reason why Ibertas stayed behind, and Henrik doesn't cover his face. You just don't have enough insight to see it. I really like that last one. So I'll leave a note in the video description if you want to check out this post for yourself and the Tumblr blog in general. But I thought that was really interesting and funny, so thank you very much, Gina, for sharing that. And finally, as I promised in the previous episode, we were going to take a look at Dezo Penguin's recent post on Reddit titled In Defense of Yosefka. Dezo Penguin writes, in devouring lore videos and posts like a rabid dog after Hunter legs, I came across a particular theory that rather rubbed me the wrong way. One, moreover, that was showing up in the work of people whose ideas and content I greatly respect. It wasn't that I necessarily thought the idea was wrong, per se, but that I found it unsatisfying in terms of what it did to the narrative. So being both a lore wonk and a lawyer, I did what any sane person in my position would do. I wrote a 12-page essay attempting to analyze the evidence against and stand up for the honor of a character who is not even my choice of waifu, or what would be more important, my wife's waifu. And thus, I invite you to pull up a chair, pour out a couple of pungent blood cocktails, and read In Defense of Yosefka. So a couple things before we dive in. I'm not, of course, going to be recapitulating the entirety of this really wonderful 12-page essay. I highly recommend that if you're interested in checking it out, that you follow the link provided in the video description below. And also to Dezo Penguin, I'm not sure if you've actually mentioned this before, that you're a lawyer, but I can't say that surprises me. And I say that as someone who, my father is a lawyer, And my little brother in a few months is about to be a lawyer as well. So I recognize that in your style of writing prior to you having pointed it out here. So I just thought that was funny. So again, because it's 12 pages long, we're not going to read the entire essay, but I did want to draw attention to a few points that I thought were very interesting. First and foremost, the charges. The question has subsequently arisen as to the true nature of Iosefka, her clinic, and the activities carried on there. In his seminal essay on the lore of Bloodborne, The Paleblood Hunt, Redgrave suggests that, in fact, the true Iosefka was involved in unspeakable research very similar, perhaps even identical, to that carried on by the imposter. Aegon of Astora discusses the same possibility in his Let's Talk Lore series of videos, as does JSF in his Bloodborne Up Close. Each of these individuals has their own personal take, their own personal interpretation of the lore, but makes the same fundamental assertion, that Iosefka is not the kindly doctor victimized by the mad scientist-esque imposter, but someone who herself has been engaged in shady experimentation on the so-called patients at her clinic. The cause for defense. The evidence presented by this theory is suggestive at the very least. Like most examination of Bloodborne lore, it is in part speculative, but it is by no means drawn from thin air. Indeed, if it was, there would be no point to this essay. But in that event, why argue the point? Why spring to Iosefka's defense? Simply put, because I do not like the theory. It isn't that I don't see the possibility, I merely find that it makes no sense from a narrative perspective, as a matter of storytelling. This seems to be a classic case of looking at the game lore with too close an eye, a failure to see the forest for the trees. By looking at the minutiae, and then working outwards from them, the theory of Iosefka's crimes results in the existence of a narrative which makes no sense. Each previous step in the narrative, each discovery laid out for a player to find, evolves the story further. Originally we have the clinic, the doctor who wants to be helpful but is unwilling to take a risk. But aha! As time passes, she proves willing to change her mind and open her doors to shelter new patients. But wait, in point of fact, she has proven to be a classic gothic mad doctor in the mold of Frankenstein, Moreau, and Jekyll, showing us the ugliness behind the facade of sane normalcy. But then, it is revealed that, in fact, an evil imposter has replaced the good doctor, that it is not a matter of secret evil behind a sweet face, but of murder and the tragic death of an innocent, helpful soul, another of the painful losses that afflict Yharnam, much as happens elsewhere in the game, to Father Gascoigne and his family. And again, these are only excerpts, so there's lots of stuff that I'm skipping in between these excerpts, but I wanted to hone in on this point in particular because I think that it is really a crucial point that I essentially have overlooked up to this point, and that is, if Iosefka is herself involved in unnatural research into the Celestials, even turning people into emissaries, then there is no point to imposter Iosefka's existence. The story, as it is, becomes exactly the same as it would have been if Iosefka had simply been one person all along, or, from the player's perspective, if we had never spoken to the original Iosefka and only met the imposter during our playthrough. Superficial good concealing secret evil. Having one evil mad doctor murdered and replaced by a second evil mad doctor who looks identical and assumes the first one's identity, when we have no emotional investment in or background for either one, is a pointless complexity. Iosefka's innocence is inherent to the tragedy of her transformation and possible death. Revealing Iosefka to be as cruel as her imposter reduces the conflict to one akin to one mobster murdering another, a matter not likely to excite anyone's interest outside of those directly involved. Would FromSoft deliberately add a layer of complexity to the questline which serves only to undo the previous layer? It seems unlikely, for this is poor storytelling, and Bloodborne and the Souls games that are its spiritual predecessors may be known for deliberately obscure storytelling, but not for merely bad narratives. Deso Penguin writes later on, consider this excerpt from the description of the Butcher's attire set. Attire of the Medaris twins, denizens of the Forbidden Woods, likely belonging to the older of the two. Both the twins became hunters and brought back and dissected their beast prey in order to support the villagers in their forbidden research. And there it is. Forbidden research was taking place, canonically, in the ramshackle village in the Forbidden Woods, a village which is very much closer to the location of the loose emissaries than the clinic or the cathedral ward. A village, moreover, in which we find the White Church set, suggesting the presence of Healing Church researchers, and the game's first supply of blue elixirs, medicine used in strange experiments conducted by high ministers of the Healing Church, and known to be used in imposter Iosefka's research, which she'll give us as rewards, as noted earlier in this essay, if you join forces with her and knowingly deliver human subjects, is also found in the village. On the beasthood side of research, one could also point to the recurrence of beast blood pellets, the finding of the beast roar, and the suggestive presence of the afflicted beggar NPC as showing the village's connection. Penguin later writes in conclusion, "In a game such as Bloodborne, there are few hard and fast answers to any but the most superficial and obvious questions of lore. An honest response to anything more complex and more interesting lies only within gradations of possibility and belief. In this essay I have attempted to examine one of my own beliefs about the game, that the story of Yosefka and her impostor was a tragedy, whereby a well-meaning good woman was murdered by a cruel scientist who assumed her identity, and the charitable facade of the clinic to advance desperate, obsessive research in an attempt to reach the level of the Great Ones by means of physical metamorphosis using the old blood as a medium. Can this narrative stand, or must I face the theories arrayed by Yosefka's accusers and bow my head? I think, in the language of the old Scottish courts, that the charges against Yosefka must stand as not proven. Are the charges themselves, that is the theory that Yosefka herself was involved in unspeakable research, much like her impostor, untenable? No, I do not believe we can say that. At the very least, I think we must admit that Yosefka's clinic is an institution of the Healing Church, and the Healing Church can never claim innocence as one of its attributes. But neither can the finger of guilt point directly to Yosefka and say, these works are yours. We cannot declare that the bodies in the shaft necessarily belong to her, and we have seen that other reasonable explanations exist for the presence of the celestial emissaries in the Forbidden Woods. At least one explanation which I personally feel makes a more compelling narrative. Therefore, while I will not stand and say that anyone who finds a less pleasant, more corrupt interpretation of Yosefka to be their preferred belief is necessarily wrong, I will say that I am not convinced by such reasoning. I see, rather, Yosefka's clinic as being precisely that, a medical institution through which the Healing Church extends its facilities of blood ministration to the people of Yharnam, and to outsiders such as ourselves who come to Yharnam for its healing blood. Yosefka herself I believe to be sincere in her mission of caring for those who came to her, to try to cure what ails them and hopefully protect them against the scourge of the beast. There is room for such persons within the Church. Blood ministration is the source of the Church's power and prestige in Yharnam, and those interested in maintaining that position would make sure that the job is carried out to the best of the Church's abilities, so that the true secret rituals could be carried out in the hidden corners of Yharnam, out of sight of the common citizenry. Yosefka stands as an innocent, and, like virtually all innocents in Yharnam, is no match for the forces of madness that stalk the night of the blood moon. So, to return to the excellent point that Penguin makes, and that is, if Yosefka is herself involved in unnatural research into the Celestials, even turning people into emissaries, then there is no point to impostor Yosefka's existence. Once again, I think that this is an excellent point and really well made as well. Now, Penguin does also say, to his credit, that identifying the proposed story of Yosefka as being unsatisfying is not in and of itself an objection to the theory, or as he puts it, in short, aesthetic opposition cannot stand as a denial to objective truth. So while this isn't the linchpin of Penguin's defense of Yosefka, I did want to draw attention to something that Miyazaki said in his interview with Future Press for the official guide. He said that the doctor at the clinic is a character that I really like, both the real one and the fake one. Some people in Yharnam are just completely beyond help, but the two of them are different. Then he was asked, did you have a reason for not creating a story path where Yosefka survived? And Miyazaki said in reply that, well, what should I say? Let's just say that I tried to make one, but the rest of the studio was against it. That's a character, that is, Imposter Yosefka, I like a great deal too. But during development, I'd say to the team, she's one of the heroines of this game. And nobody would believe me, which left me a bit crestfallen. That's one of the underlying themes of the game, or you could say that I have a thing for the scholarly investigator character trope. You have Sage Frake in Demon Souls and Master Willem in this game, and the fake Yosefka kind of descends from there. But perhaps because I'm not that good at characterization, none of those characters ever seem to get very popular. It makes me feel a little sorry for the fake Yosefka if she follows that same route. Well, I'm sure Miyazaki would be very happy to, if he ever caught a glimpse of the fact that we've spent a lot of time talking about Yosefka and Imposter Yosefka in this series, but But that aside, he does raise some very interesting points here. One being that, and I don't want to make this seem like a catch-all fallback, especially after the weight of our discussions in the previous episode, but it does seem as though this is one of those storylines that was simply just not finished. And so therefore, yes, it's unsatisfying. And though, once again, Desel Penguin, that's not his only argument in defense of Iosefka, but I did think that the original point was well made, but that it needs to be considered in the context of this remark here, which basically points to there being, at some point, more to the story behind Iosefka and Imposter Iosefka that unfortunately didn't make it into the final game, that for one reason or another, as he said, the rest of the studio was against it. And the other interesting thing, so that would be, I think, a point against that particular aspect of Desel Penguin's defense. But a point in favor of it could be the extent to which he steers the conversation of the interview towards Imposter Iosefka. When the Future Press, whoever was interviewing him from Future Press, they weren't they were asking more about Iosefka herself and not Imposter Iosefka. So even though Imposter Iosefka seems in some ways to be kind of a two-dimensional evil scholarly investigator, she too seems to have, there seems to have been plans at a certain point to make her a more complex and perhaps a more tragic character than one who is just kind of, doing all these experiments according to this particular character trope. And Miyazaki, and maybe it's just Miyazaki modesty, where he's saying that he said at several points that I didn't even quote, that he's just not good at characterization. So, I don't know, but what I do know is that, in general, I really enjoyed reading this defense of Iosefka that Desel Penguin wrote, and I recommend that you all go check it out. But equally, I think it's very interesting that Miyazaki sees Imposter Iosefka as a heroine in the game. And what's more is that, there was supposed to be a story path where we were able to enable Iosefka to survive, to not get transformed into a Celestial. So, in sum, once again, great post, Desel Penguin, and fantastic essay, quite entertaining, and raises a lot of very good points. Just to reiterate my own position on Imposter Iosefka, because I've waffled quite a bit, but I think, but overall in my headcanon for Imposter Iosefka has remained more or less consistent, and that is, I don't think that she was herself explicitly engaged in the type of experimentation that leads to, these people being transformed into emissaries, but I have a hard time imagining that she would have been, because, the clinic is named after her. It's called Iosefka's Clinic. So insofar as there was some shady activity going on in the clinic before the swap with Imposter Iosefka, I wouldn't go as far as to argue that she was explicitly involved. But I do think that, at least again in my headcanon, the more likely explanation is that she turned a blind eye to some things. Maybe in order so that she might actually help people on the side. Maybe that was part of the deal. You look the other way while we do things in this back room here, and you can treat all of the normal Yharnamites you want. So maybe she had noble intentions and looked the other way for certain things. I think that, it's most likely that she's guilty just for looking the other way. But of course, that's not an argument that would likely hold up in a court of law, so take from that what you will. But that's going to do it for this episode, so thank you all very much for joining me, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.